first thing it asks you to do is to identify your vertex. So the vertex is at this point. If we are looking at our vertex should be at 2 and 2, 3. Okay. It then says tell if it's a minimum or a maximum. If we are looking at that, since it's on the top, that would be our maximum. Now, they did not ask you to find domain and range for this. But if I was asking you for the domain, the domain is going to be all real numbers, because it's all of our x values. And if I was looking for the range of this one, you are always looking at where your vertex is, okay? And you're looking at the y-coordinate for the range, and you would say that y has to be less than or equal to 3, and it, again, is still for all real numbers, okay? So just kind of as you're practicing doing that, usually, if it's not a story problem, the domain is going to be all reals, and then the range is always dealing with where your vertex is, okay? As we look at question number 29 and 31, so question 29 said identify your domain and range of each one. So the best thing you would need to find in this was to be your vertex. So if we are looking at 29, and we'll do 29 instead of 31, because you should be able to do that. But in 29, what do we know if there's no middle term and we just have an x squared? If I find, we said yesterday, where does this last number, what does that do to our graph? So if I think of this as my x and my y-axis, what does that plus 6 do to our graph?
It changes the vertex.
Changes the vertex. So if I am looking at this one, my vertex for this one, you didn't have to graph it, but in 29, should be at 0 and 6, right? Should my parabola be going up or down because of that lead coefficient of 3? If we look at that lead coefficient, Mallory, what do you think? Up or down? Up. 3, right? Positive is going to make it going up. So if I'm looking at 29, I don't really have to graph this, but I know this is going up with a parabola. And I could find the other points, but it didn't tell me I had to graph. It just said identify the domain and range. So if I'm looking at 29, my domain is going to be all of my x values. All of my x values, are we restricted at what kind of a number we can put in for our x? Just like the last one, we are not restricted. So our domain is going to be all real numbers. That is all the possibilities. You could put in fractions, decimals, really big numbers, really small numbers. So your domain is all reals. Your range is looking at where your vertex is. So when we look at our vertex was at 0, 6, and our graph is going up. So we are going to say where y is greater or equal to 6. Again, for all real numbers. Because it can be fractions and decimals going up from there. Okay? So as you were looking at that, make sure if I want my vertex, as I look at that, what do I know about this equation? Because it does not have a middle term, what do I know about my vertex? The x-coordinate should be what? Should be 0, right? If we looked at all of our parabolas, when we had a y and an x, and if you plug in 0 here, right? And now if I plug in 1, I'm going to start seeing it going either up or down, right? Should this graph, if I'm graphing this, looking at that lead coefficient in front of x squared, be a parabola that is a U-shape going up or a U-shape going down? Should be going up, right? So this is going to be a parabola going up, right? And the reason we know that is this is a positive 2.75. My vertex, this is what determines when there's only 2 terms, when we only have an x squared plus a number. Remember we said that's what determines how it moves, our y-intercept. So my vertex should simply be 0, 3, as I'm looking at 17. So as I'm looking at 17, 18, 19, you have to tell the vertex. The other thing you have to write is your axis of symmetry. Tomorrow's assignment will do a lot more with the axis of symmetry, but we build in the middle term, so they get a little tougher. So what is our axis of symmetry? Yesterday we said it's always x equals for an equation. And which coordinate are we looking at, the x or the y? The x, so it should be axis of symmetry, x equals 0. So as you're working on those ones, then as you look at the last page, 20, 21, 22 to 25. Again, it's just identifying the domain and range, so you kind of need to think of where the vertex is, right? It doesn't tell you in 22 to 25 to find the vertex, but that is kind of what you need to be thinking. Here you are using those equations, okay? So if we take a look at number 20, because I'm not sure if I'm yesterday's with the story problem. So it says this physics experiment, they dropped the golf ball from the bridge is 75 feet tall, and it says in feet, graph the function after how many seconds. So if we are looking at t for our time and h for our height, does it make sense to have negative time? No. So as you start number 20, please put 0 for your first time. That's our time in seconds, right? So when you go to make your graph, and you're going to do yours on your graph paper, if I'm looking at yours, I am really looking at this being my height and this being my time. This is in seconds. This is in our feet. Okay? You'll do this on your graph paper. So I plug in 0. I might want to do 1 second. I might do 2 seconds as I'm looking at that. And as I look at this, the next thing I want to be careful for is that as I am doing this one in question number 20, I might want to be seeing where is it going to hit the ground. And if at 2 it hasn't hit 0 yet, this isn't down to 0, then you're going to want to definitely go to 3. Okay? So you might go 0, 1, 2, 3. So make sure you have your table both in 20 and 21. I'm going to be looking for your table. And then approximately where it hits the ground. Okay? And your exact approximate does not have to be exact, but coming up in the next few units we'll get more exact with that. Okay? And then the last one, those last 2 questions, they discuss it. How do they differ? You do not have to graph it, just like last night's homework. And then this one says, explain what determines if your parabola opens up and down. So again, that should be review of the